Okay, people, I've been late with these reviews. I saw these films last week, but because of some personal stuff, I wasn't able to get them up ahead of now, so I'm going to have to smash them both into one video in order to stay on top of things. So, consider this an indie film double feature, more or less. First up, He Named Me Malala. This is one of those documentaries that tries to have most of its story told through the subject's own words, as we are primarily hearing from Malala and her father Ziauddin. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing any names, because not familiar with the language, but anyway, we're primarily hearing from Malala and her father for most of the film. There isn't really an exact story structure per se, as it's more of a portrait of Malala as a person, both as an activist and as a teenager living in the UK. That said, we do get a chronology of the events leading to her speech on national television in Pakistan and the assassination attempt by the Taliban, as well as her acceptance of the Nobel Peace Prize. One thing I especially like about this film is that it shows the tactics used by the Taliban to impose their very twisted version of Islam on the populace, as their tactics primarily use fear, but also that sense of getting people to unite against the outsiders. I mean, it's kind of like McCarthyism, where you have the main guy, whose name escapes me at the moment. He had a radio broadcast, and at the end of each broadcast, he would read off the names of people who were, quote-unquote, sinful. And so, in addition to instilling kind of a culture of fear by killing people who speak out, it also gets those who are basically following along with what they're saying to kind of turn on the people who are speaking out. And speaking of the people who are speaking out, there were actually quite a few people featured that were very outspoken against the Taliban, often at the cost of their own lives. It provides much needed context that we don't usually see here in the US, and it makes it easier to understand the actual struggles people face in such turbulent areas. As such, it makes it abundantly clear that groups like the Taliban do not speak for Muslims the world over. That's about as, well, stupid as assuming that groups like the Westboro Baptist Church and the Ku Klux Klan speak for Christians the world over, when they do not. What I also like is how it gives a little bit of time to actually look at some of the people who are actually very critical of Malala, as it shows snippets of interviews done on Pakistani television that shows basically a lot of citizens reacting to her newfound fame. Some saying that her father wrote her speeches and that's why she's famous. Some saying that she basically won some sort of lottery just because she got shot and survived. And it's kind of interesting that, well, there are people that actually would be that critical, and I kind of like how the documentary made sure to show that, rather than trying to paint Malala as some sort of saint, which this film does not do. Now, what really stuck out to me watching this film was the animation they used to illustrate anecdotes and stories they couldn't really get any footage for. For the most part, it's like you're watching one of those narrated picture book videos like you would see on shows like Reading Rainbow, or the kind of tapes you would see on TV, not so much on TV, but if you were in an elementary school and they got like one of those tapes that was a narrated picture book, it was kind of like that, where it would slowly crossfade to kind of give the illusion of movement to show the character kind of moving through. But it also accents that with a little bit of a light painting animation style. It's like the only smooth thing that actually moves on screen, as you see kind of words slowly form, and it's like the brightest thing, and it makes for a nice little piece of symbolism, as it's kind of trying to kind of do the whole thing of, oh, you've got to speak the fire. And I actually kind of like that, because if you look at a lot of cultures, a lot of people tend to associate fire with knowledge, especially if you look at the myth of Prometheus. And so, it was actually a bit of a nice touch, and I liked the use of symbolism via the light painting style that's kind of on top of the more limited animation. Overall, I found this to be a fascinating documentary that made me want to learn more about Malala and the history of what's going on in Pakistan in regards to the Taliban. In addition to the creative animations, I like the fact that it wasn't really out to present her as a saint. It's almost like it went out of its way to remind us that she's still just a teenager. If you're someone like me who was curious about Malala and her work but didn't know really where to start, this film provides a pretty good starting point. It's also good for helping you better understand just how dangerous groups like the Taliban are, and not in the nebulous way our media tends to address it. All of that said, He Named Me Malala gets a 5 out of 5. With that, we move on to Freeheld. Now, I'm starting to notice a bit of a disturbing trend in films. Now, I understand the Obergefell's decision was an important historical event, but I'm a little disheartened by how quick studios are to capitalize on that by rushing films into production that are about the various fights for LGBT rights. First, we had the critically panned Stonewall, and now we have Freeheld. Now, the reason I say it was rushed into production is because that's how the film feels, rushed. It felt like they either didn't do much research or didn't really have that much to work with, so they tried padding the film like crazy. What also doesn't help is the almost mean-spirited caricatures they created for the people from Garden State Equality, the group that we're more or less supposed to root for. They almost come across like a group of easily offended, politicizing, open quotes, activists that subsist on a steady diet of outrage and Tumblr reblogs. As such, they weren't really endearing and come across almost as bad, if not worse, than the Freeholders. As for the Freeholders themselves, there isn't much personality to them beyond a vague sense of tradition and complacency. Only 2 of them get any development, but even then, it's minimal at best, as their motivations were so transparent, they may as well have held up signs summarizing what their characters were. The chiefest problem of this film is that the central conflict never really feels like a fight or a struggle. For a good chunk of it, our main characters are more or less left on the sidelines as everyone and everything goes crazy around them. Now, I get that that may be what it was like for the actual people this is based on, but in the context of the film we're watching, it just feels like the characters were forced out of their own story. On top of that, the film goes through the same cliched beats we see in a lot of films that focus on human rights cases, often to the point where it feels almost insulting, like the film thinks the audience is too stupid to understand certain things, so it's constantly explaining itself. Another problem with the story is the pacing, as it starts out really slow, only to then move at warp speed for the remaining 2/3 of the film. When it comes to the acting, we have good actors, but their performances are stifled by the script, as there aren't really any line choices or scenes that make for really good drama. This is especially visible for Ellen Page and Julianne Moore during the earlier moments of the film. They didn't really have any believable chemistry, and it was like I was watching a really bad romantic comedy at times. Now, during the meat of the film, it improves a little bit, as we do get to see more of the genuine caring and concern, but that's around the time the characters are pushed from the story. Overall, I get the feeling that if they waited a couple of years, then maybe it wouldn't feel as rushed or as patronizing, as the issue of same-sex marriage is still a little too fresh. It doesn't help that there just wasn't really much of a story here to begin with, or at the very least it's not presented in a way that makes it actually interesting or engaging. I know we will get a film that will discuss marriage equality in a way that will resonate with audiences. This film just isn't it. This is no Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. This is pretty much just kind of, well, it's mediocre at best. It feels more like something that would be a Lifetime TV movie than an actual theatrical release. All of that said, Freeheld gets a 3 out of 5. So that's it for this double feature episode of Romney's Reviews. Now, I may not be able to get into any reviews of any film releases this week. I'll try to find some time to watch Crimson Peak if I can, but the reason is because I'm trying to get Monster Clash, well, ready to go. I'm still watching the films, doing the write-ups, and trying to get to the point where I can shoot them all and have them all go up the week of Halloween. So that's going to take up most of my time, so you may not see a lot of reviews for a while. So yeah, that's all I can say. Thank you for watching. I'll hopefully see you all next time for either another review or for the first episode of Monster Clash. Bye now.